Thanks for joining me tonight to hear all about retirement. This webinar, so it is geared toward folks who are in what we call the accumulator phase. Folks who are working and saving for retirement. So if you're someone who is near the finish line or at the finish line for retirement, not to say that if you're in that category, there's nothing here for you, but there's only so much that I can fit into a talk that is less than an hour. But I'm going to go through as much as I can here tonight. Okay, so I do have a disclaimer, which really just says that I'm not going to be giving any sort of individual investment advice tonight, and of course that's what we do with financial planning versus what I'm going to do here tonight. All right, cool. So a little bit about me. So I graduated from NC State in 2008, and I practiced as an emergency veterinarian for a long time, like over 12 years. And then I became a really big money nerd while I was paying off my student loans. And I started taking some financial courses, and I started a few projects in the vet med field related to personal finance. So I started the Debt Free Vets Facebook group and the Veterinary Financial podcast, and ran the Vet Financial Summit during COVID, which was a virtual conference. And then I decided over the last few years to make a transition with my career into financial planning for veterinarians and student loan consulting for vets. And I recently started my own financial planning firm called All Vet Financial. All right, so an overview of what we're going to talk about tonight. So we are going to talk about how to save for retirement. We are going to talk about the time value of money and talk about what retirement saving looks like if you are a solopreneur versus an employee in vet med. And we're also going to talk about individual retirement accounts, which are accounts that are separate from any sort of employer. Talk about some things related to taxes in retirement, also student loans and retirement savings, and how you might be able to save some money on your student loan payments by contributing more to retirement. And then we'll have some Q&A at the end as well. All right. So I want you to take a moment to just think about what you envision for yourself during retirement. So some people want to travel more. Some people just want to kick back and relax. Some people are looking for an adventure during their retirement, and to be able to do things that they haven't been able to do or haven't had time to do while they've been working more. Some people have a project that they've always wanted to work on, like writing a book or building a barn, or any number of projects that you might want to do that you've been putting off because you want to wait until you're not working every day. So let's talk about the time value of money. So this is a really important foundational concept when we think about retirement. And so the idea with time value of money is that a sum of money is worth more now than that same amount of money is going to be worth in a future date, like what you can buy with that same amount of money at a future date. And so money, if it's not invested, its value erodes over time, and that money is going to have less buying power. And so waiting to save for retirement or waiting to invest is a missed opportunity to build wealth. And so part of this discussion is going to be talking about saving as much as you can toward retirement, or saving as much as you need to save to get to your goals. Okay, and so this is an example, this is an illustration of the time value of money. So the idea is with this graph, so the same amount of money was saved starting at age 25 for one person and age 35 for another person. And so you can see that the person who started at age 25 at the end, so they were saving the same amount on a monthly basis. At the end, the person who started at age 25 has a lot more money compared to the person who started at age 35. And so for veterinarians in particular, okay, we started saving for retirement later in life, most of us, than folks who maybe graduated college at age 22 and they were completely done with college at that point. And so all of us are starting a little bit later with saving for retirement, just given that we had a longer college career. All right. And so I'm doing this talk because I want to make sure that you're not nervous about a 401k. And I'll also point out this meme talks about the company 401k, but I'm also going to talk about how you can have a 401k even if you're not working for a company. All right. So, but I am going to start out just talking about our basic workplace retirement plans because some of you may be associates, some of you may be part-time associates. I know, certainly Rue is a relief company, and so some folks are picking up some shifts through Root in addition to just working at a regular W-2 job and having a full-time job. And then some folks may be full-time relief vets who are listening here on this call. So we'll start out talking about workplace retirement plans, and then I'm going to talk about plans for solopreneurs as well. So, if you are an employee, the most common retirement plan that I see in veterinary hospitals is the 401k. And a lot of times we also have a Roth 401k available as well. When I'm talking about a regular 401k, I'm talking about pre-tax contributions. So that money that would be paid to you. It's anything that you put into the 401k pre-tax, it's not going to be taxed today, but it would be taxed in retirement versus what goes into a Roth solo for or Roth 401k. I am going to talk about Roth solo 401ks here in a little bit, but what goes into a Roth 401k that would be taxed now, and then when you take money out in retirement, it would not be taxed. And so that's what we're talking about here. So if you're working for an employer that has a 401k, for most people, they have a maximum that they can contribute of 23,500. If you happen to be age 50 plus, then you also have a top-up contribution for the 401k. Same thing with the simple IRA, which is uh, that is the one that is the second most common employer retirement plan. And so a lot of times, some of the independent hospitals will have a simple IRA available to them instead of a 401k. One of the reasons for that is that historically, setting up a simple IRA has been less expensive than setting up a 401k. And so the maximum that you could contribute if you have a simple IRA available to you through a practice that you are working for is 16,500. And then there's a little bit of a top-up contribution if you're 50 plus. Um, for the SEP IRA, this is one that I'm going to come back to and talk about in a little bit more detail when we're talking about solopreneurs. As far as a workplace retirement plan, it is something that is less commonly available to folks who are employees. Okay, now let's talk about solopreneur retirement accounts. And so, if you are a business owner with no employees, so that includes being a business of one. So, if you are a full-time relief vet, or if you're thinking about becoming a full-time relief vet and doing working shifts that are 1099 shifts, so the type of shifts where you're an independent contractor and taxes are not being taken out of your paychecks. You can, of course, have W-2 relief shifts that you work where they do take out taxes. And so I'm talking more about folks who are independent contractors when I am talking about opening up a solopreneur retirement account. And so this applies to a lot of relief vets that have self-employment income, relief technicians as well, folks who do maybe some consulting on the side or consulting full time as an independent contractor. Also, if you work a lot of vaccine clinics, that would be something where you could potentially use that income and put it toward a solopreneur retirement account. Um, some folks who are house called or mobile practice owners who maybe don't have any employees, they would fall into this category as well as solopreneurs with no employees. And importantly, one of the things that comes up when I'm talking with my financial planning clients is when they're talking about setting up a retirement account, and we're talking about, okay, maybe it's a full-time relief fed, is they'll ask me about whether they should set up a business entity and whether that matters for a retirement account. And so, for purposes of this discussion, if you are a sole proprietor, so that's where you don't have a business entity, you can have something like a solo 401k that you set up for yourself. You can also be an LLC or PLLC. You'll want to check your state regulations as far as what sort of business entity you might set up in the different rules, because those vary from state to state. But if you have an LLC, if you have an S corp, those are also generally folks who would be able to have a retirement account that they set up themselves. And so a little bit more about that. So the most common types of retirement accounts that I see, for example, full-time relief vets set up for themselves or set up through a financial planner or financial advisor, the most common types are either a SEP IRA or a solo 401k. And so the SEP IRA, it's easier in some ways because you can fill out a form at tax time and you can put money into a SEP IRA doing that. But a solo 401k might actually be better. And so reasons for that. So they both have the same upper limitation. And so this is $70,000. That reason that is higher than what I said when I was on the other slide, where I said, okay, maximum is 23,500, is because we're thinking about having both an employee side and an employer side to some of these accounts. And so with a solo 401k, the reason I like it better than a SEP IRA is because a solo 401k is a lot more flexible. So it allows you to make contributions as an employee. So you could make contributions either throughout the year or contributions in a lump sum. And you also can make an additional contribution as an employer. And so, meaning at tax time, your tax professional can help you figure out, okay, how much more could I contribute beyond that 23,500? How much more could I contribute to that account on the employer side of that account? And so there are a couple of extra things that you have to think about if you do set up a solo 401k, or if you work through a financial planner to set up a solo 401k. So you have to file a plan document. You would be considered the administrator of that account because it's your solo 401k. If you, or eventually when you have a balance in that account that exceeds $250,000, there's a special form that you have to make sure you file every single year with the IRS called a 5500 form. And so, but I do like a solo 401k for the flexibility of being able to contribute to it whenever you want. With the SEP IRA, so it only allows employer contributions. And so it's very hard to know with a SEP IRA how much you can contribute until tax time, because all the calculations that need to be done to figure out those employer contributions, they don't really happen until tax time. So I have had some clients that I've worked with through financial planning who maybe they had a SEP IRA and they contributed to it during the year. I've had folks who contributed too much, and then at tax time they were told, hey, you've got to pull some money back out of that account because it was too much. So that's what I mean about not really knowing until tax time how much you're allowed to contribute to that account. And so with relief vets, one of the big pain points that I come across is taxes. And so one of the things that a retirement account that you set up for your independent contractor work, one of the things it does for you is it enables you to make some pre-tax contributions to that account, like a solo 401k. and that reduces your adjusted gross income, and therefore it's going to reduce the amount of taxes that you end up having to pay. And it also, adjusted gross income, by the way, if you have student loans, because I love talking about student loans, if you have student loans, adjusted gross income is what they use to calculate your student loan payment on an income driven repayment plan. And so also making contributions to retirement as a relief vet, that's also going to help reduce future student loan payments as well. All right. So what about other types of retirement accounts? Because there are other retirement accounts that are not associated with a workplace employment plan, workplace retirement plan, and they're not those solopreneur retirement accounts that I was just talking about. So other things that you have as options for contributing to retirement that could be in addition to a 401k, for example. So we have a Roth IRA, so that's a possibility. We also have traditional IRA, which I'm not going to talk as much about. But the maximum that you can contribute per year to either of those is $7,000. And if you contribute to a little bit to a Roth and a little bit to a traditional, you still have a $7,000 limit across the two, as that's a question that I get sometimes. And then if you're 50 plus, you do have an extra $1,000, so you can actually contribute $8,000 if you are 50 years old or older. I also have another type of account on this slide called a taxable brokerage account. And so if you, let's say you maxed out your 401k, let's say you maxed out your Roth IRA, and you still have money available that you could contribute to retirement in addition to that. So that's where I also take a look at contributions to a taxable brokerage account, which is actually a non-retirement investment account, but it can be used for retirement. And a lot of my clients who want to retire early will use that type of account for part of their retirement savings. And so the reason I bring that up is because when we think about a 401k, for example, you're not going to have full access to the money in that account until age 59 and a half. And so if you're looking at retiring at age 50 or age 55, then you may want to have some retirement savings that is outside of a traditional retirement account. All right, so let's see, here we go. Okay, so next slide, what I want to talk about is that we've got a couple of things that we need to consider for limitations, because I talked about a Roth IRA. So when you're making contributions to a Roth IRA, those are the type of retirement contributions where you're contributing money that you've already paid taxes on. And then in retirement, there's no taxes that you have to pay on either what you originally put into that account or on the earnings from that account, so that it's tax-free in retirement. And so it's a popular account for that reason. And so there are some limitations, though, for being able to contribute directly to a Roth IRA. And so one of those limitations is your adjusted gross income. So if you make over $150,000 and you're single, or if you are married filing jointly and you make over $236,000 as a married couple, those are the times where you have to start thinking about it starts to phase out being able to make direct contributions to a Roth IRA, and not too far above these limits, they would say, okay, you can't contribute directly to a Roth IRA at all. It also comes into play with married filing separately. So if you, and this is at any income level, if you are filing your taxes, married filing separately to save money on student loan payments, on an income-driven repayment plan, which is something very common among veterinarians. It's a great way to save money on student loan payments. If it's something that you are doing, then you do have to think about the fact that if you're married filing separately, you are not allowed to contribute directly to a Roth IRA. And so with that, we have to think about a backdoor Roth IRA instead. And so what is a backdoor Roth IRA? So a backdoor Roth IRA is something that you would again you would have to think about this if you exceed the income limits or if you file taxes married filing separately, or you could be in both categories, right? And so what you would do is instead of the money coming out of your checking account and going directly into the Roth IRA, it would go into a traditional IRA in between. And so money would go out of your checking account into a traditional IRA, and you would not invest the money while it's in the traditional IRA. And it takes a couple days for the money to settle. Once it's settled into the traditional IRA, it gets transferred from the traditional IRA to the Roth IRA, and that's what the backdoor Roth IRA is. There are a couple of complications that you would need to consider before you do a backdoor Roth IRA. The most important one is something called the pro rata rule, which can get very complicated. The way I can make it the simplest is that you would need to be concerned about the pro rata rule if you have any other IRAs besides a Roth IRA. So that would be like a traditional IRA, rollover IRA, simple IRA. If you have any of those, then you wouldn't just want to go do a backdoor Roth IRA without examining those other IRAs, because the pro rata rule, what happens when that comes into play is that we worry about you having to pay additional taxes for doing a backdoor Roth. So you're going to want to know what types of accounts you have before you do something like this. Okay, so let's see. So next thing is just talking a little bit more about pre-tax versus Roth. And so I get a lot of questions about which one is better. Should I go with Roth or should I go with pre-tax, or what I would call traditional contributions to retirement? And so one of the things that comes up is people will say, okay, well, we don't know what the tax rates are going to be like in the future. So there are some financial advisors or financial planners who are convinced that they know the answer to this question. And so I always like to say my crystal ball is in the shop and that I don't know the answer to this. And so because if we knew whether tax rates were going to be higher in the future versus now, then it would be a little bit easier to say, okay, should I pay taxes on my retirement money now or should I wait until later? And so what I would encourage you to consider is the trade-offs. And so I have some folks I know who say, I'd rather have more dollars today to spend with my family. And so I would rather make pre-tax contributions so that my paychecks are bigger. And then I have other folks who are like, hey, that doesn't matter to me. It's something where I'd really rather not have to pay as much tax in retirement, and sometimes they're looking at Roth a little bit more. So I would actually encourage you to consider having some of both of those types of accounts. And so, a couple of other considerations, and I'll touch I'll touch on that subject again, Roth versus traditional a little in a few minutes. But let's talk a little bit more about retirement savings and student loans, because I get a ton of questions about that, and this also comes into play with whether we want to put more into the pre-tax side versus the Roth side of things. And so what's really important to think about with that discussion is, okay, pre-tax deductions are going to reduce your adjusted gross income. And since adjusted gross income is what's going to reduce your future student loan payments, often with folks who have student loans who are going for income-driven repayment, we're often looking at making those pre-tax contributions and, like, for example, maxing out your 401k on the pre-tax side as as a primary factor, and one of the first things that you would consider. So, of course, there are a lot of individual variables, but that's something that you would consider if you are going for forgiveness with your student loans is, okay, we want to maximize that forgiveness as much as possible. If we're making more pre-tax contributions to retirement, that's one way to reduce adjusted gross income, make those payments a little bit smaller. So that involves making contributions to solo 401k or 401k, simple IRA if you have an employer who has one of those. And then the other thing that's going to be huge is making sure that you invest for the tax bomb. So I used to say save for the tax bomb. I've started to say invest for the tax bomb because that's really what I'm recommending that you do. And so the tax bomb is the taxes that are owed at the end of student loan forgiveness. And so if you get your loans forgiven, it's kind of like when you win the lottery and you have to think about that you have to pay taxes the year afterward. And so the type of account that I recommend investing in for the tax bomb is a brokerage account. So that's that non-retirement investment account that I was talking about. And we all hope that the tax bomb goes away and that it's not going to be a thing. And if it's not a thing, then you could use it for early retirement money. So that would be pretty cool. Okay, so this is just sort of a flow chart for ways to think about various accounts and ways to think about priorities with your finances. And so at the top, we've got emergency fund. And so that's kind of the baseline, wanting to make sure that you've got an emergency fund. I typically say start with something like $3,000 to $5,000 if you're a new grad and maybe you're just starting out and you don't have one, and then build that up to 3 to 6 months of expenses. And so you would determine your expenses by looking back at what your expenses have been over the last 2 or 3 months, or using a budgeting app, and they could just tabulate that for you. And then the next one is 401k match. And so if you're an employee and you have an employer that is matching a certain amount of your income, then that is something that applies to you. If you are a full-time relief vet and you're independent, then you don't have a 401k match. And so that's okay. We would just skip that one. If you have any high interest debt, like credit card debt, then that would be something that you would look at paying off next. And I do want to highlight that I'm not talking about student loans when I say high interest credit card, when I say high interest debt. Certainly it might be at more than 5% because some people I meet with have 6 or 7% interest rate, but I'm not talking about your student loans here. I'm talking about credit cards, or maybe if you have a car loan that's at higher than 5%, something like that. And then next we have, and this is also an important account to consider when we're thinking about retirement as well, contributing to a health savings account if you have a high deductible health insurance plan. And so that's kind of an interesting account because it has a triple tax benefit. And so it's something where you're not going to get taxed on the money today if you put it into the account. If you use it for healthcare expenses, you're not going to get taxed then. And it can also be invested. So once you build a health savings account higher than either like 1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000, depending on the account. Once the balance exceeds that, you can actually invest the money. A lot of people forget to invest the money in their HSA, so that's something to look at if you have that type of account. Um, and this is something where you could actually treat this as another retirement account. And so it's the type of account where everyone's going to have healthcare expenses at some point in the future, and this can be used actually on Medicare expenses. So if you go through your whole life and you don't have healthcare expenses, or you just pay for them out of pocket, this health savings account could become a really big account that you use when you're older, for healthcare expenses. And then we've got maxing out 401k. So I talked about that. I talked about other retirement accounts like a Roth IRA or backdoor Roth IRA. And then we've got taxable accounts as well. So that's the brokerage account that I was talking about. And at the bottom, so if you have a mortgage that is sitting at like 2.5 or 3%, paying down the low interest loans, that bottom rung is for you right there. So that's kind of the lower priority from a financial perspective. Okay, and so I get this question a lot. I get a question like, okay, how much should I save for retirement? And the answer to that question, like a lot of other financial questions, is it depends. And so, what the books say, so if you look at just a typical personal finance book, what the books typically say is they say to save 10 to 15% of your gross income for retirement. Some folks will say, okay, well, hold up, if you went to professional school, you started later. And so they will say to target something more like 20% of your gross income and work towards something like that just because you started later with saving for retirement. There's a movement called the FIRE movement that stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And so those folks are saving 30% of their income or as much as 50% of their gross income. And so I'm not mentioning that as a suggestion. I'm just mentioning that as something you might want to look up if you're someone who is, really interested, like truly interested in having an option to retire early. There is a documentary out there called Playing with Fire that is a really good documentary about someone. It was a family who was pursuing that, and they moved from a high cost of living area to a low cost of living area, and they're showing all the different things that they did to kind of change their lives around this goal of fire. And so, one of the things that I think is really important as a concept to consider when we're thinking about retirement is that your savings rate is going to be the thing that really ultimately gets you to financial freedom. And so, if you are someone who, and some people don't want to retire early, some people just want to retire on time. But if you are someone who really wants to retire early, then it's something where you're going to need to have a higher savings rate than someone who wants to retire on time. So, and I say on time like, the typical time frame, like age 65 or 67. Okay, so then the other thing that I want you to consider for yourself is whether you could afford to save more for retirement. And so the reason I bring this up is a couple of things. I have talked with, of course, a lot of veterinarians over the last several years about their finances, and I have come across folks who, maybe when they first graduated, they said, okay, well, I'm just going to contribute just as much as I need to get the match from my employer, and they stopped there. And they 10 years later, they never remembered, they never thought about increasing the amount that they're contributing to retirement. And so it's something where I would really encourage you to revisit this at least on a yearly basis, how much you're contributing to retirement. And so a couple of other factors. So a lot of veterinarians saw their incomes increase significantly during COVID. And so those higher incomes create more opportunity, right? So I've come across some vets who just piled up extra money in a savings account. Hopefully it's in a high yield savings account and at least sitting at 3.5% interest or something like that. But also some folks are holding on to too much cash. So if you're thinking about, okay, like an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of expenses, if you're sitting on a lot more than that and it doesn't have a goal attached to it, then that would also be a sign that you might need to be saving more, whether it's for retirement or putting more money into investments. So things to think about there. And so a couple of ways to figure out how much money you have to work with. So this is a screenshot from an app that I use with my financial planning clients called Monarch Money. It's also available to anybody. So if you look it up, it's monarch.com, or it used to be monarchmoney.com. I think they just changed it. And so in this example, so you might not spend $17,000 a month, but in this example, okay, when we're looking at income minus expenses, and then we look at what they had left over, so they had like $2,800 left over at the end of the month. If that's a pattern that occurs month over month, then that shows us, okay, that's an amount that we have to put toward various financial goals, whether that is saving more for retirement, whether it is putting money toward other goals that you have. And so, if it's something where you want to do this yourself and figure out, okay, can I afford to save more? This would be one way to do it using a budgeting app like this. There's one called YNAB as well, which stands for You Need a Budget. So, that's an option as well. Or you could work with a financial planner and they could also help you with investment management. So that's another way that you could look at this problem and figure out, okay, where should that next dollar go? That's a lot of what I do with my clients. All right. So there's a concept that I like talking about related to retirement called the three bucket strategy. And so the three buckets are tax deferred, tax free, and taxable. And so there are types of accounts that I've already talked about that are associated with that. And so the idea with a three bucket strategy is that in an ideal world, you would have some money in each of these buckets so that when you retire, you've got choices of, okay, where do I pull money from? Because then you would have some money that would be tax deferred money that you would need to you would need to pay some taxes in retirement on that money, like in your 401k, for example. Then you would have some money that's in like a Roth IRA or Roth 401k that would be tax free. Same with a health savings account as well. And then you'd have some money that, maybe it's in a brokerage account, which is a non-retirement investment account. It's more flexible, but you have capital gains taxes that you have to pay when you're using that account. So the thought is that you'd have some money in each of these buckets. And so it's something where, if you're early in your financial journey, this is perhaps something that you're working toward over time. It's not something that you necessarily have to have all at once. All right. And so back to this. So we've hit all of those different ones. So we talked about 401k. So that's like your pre-tax retirement bucket. We talked about Roth IRA or backdoor Roth IRA. That's your tax-free retirement bucket. And then you've got your taxable brokerage account down here. All right. Cool. So if you're a money nerd like me, there is a book out there called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, and he's got a lot of really good quotes. One of them is that having more control over your time and options is becoming one of the most valuable currencies in the world. And so that's what we're thinking about when we're talking about saving more for retirement, is having more control over your time and your options long term. Okay, and so a few takeaways. So your savings rate is really the thing that's going to get you to your work optional date. And there are lots of different ways to save for retirement. So I've talked about a number of those during this presentation. And I would definitely encourage you to look at your finances and see if it makes sense for you to increase your contribution rate. Because a lot of the vets that I meet with, whether it's for student loan consults or financial planning clients, there's a lot of opportunity out there for veterinary professionals to increase their contribution rate for retirement. And then another thing that you'll want to think about is just automating your money as much as possible. So, a lot of people have their bill payments that are automated, but you could also look at automating your savings, automating investing, and automating if you're an independent contractor and let's say you've got a solo 401k and it's yours, well, automating that as well. So you can set up automatic contributions. It's not something where you have to wait until the end of the year if you're a full-time relief vet. So the more automation that you put in for your finances, the more secure you're going to be with your finances because you're probably going to save more, you're going to have that money invested for a longer period of time, most likely, if you have things automated as well. And I encourage you to continue to make personal finance part of your CE, just like you did tonight, and do that so that you can retire before you're 90. And so, all right, so I have a lot of free resources available on my website. I've got the QR code right here that goes straight to my website. And so I have the Veterinary Financial Podcast. I have the Debt Free Vets Facebook group that you can check out if you're not in that group already. And really, what I do is I help veterinarians with financial planning and student loan consulting. And so, if you have any questions, you could feel free to set up an intro call with me on my website, or I'm happy to answer questions via email as well. And so I've got my email address up there too. So, all right. So I'd love to take any questions that you guys have right now.
All right. Thank you. Let's see. First question. Um, what questions should I be asking to find the right financial advisor?
All right, cool. So that's a really good question. And so what I would do is I would ask some questions related to what you're most interested in and find out if that financial planner is familiar with those things that are most important to you. So one question I would ask is how many vets do you work with? Because there are some financial planners who they work with every profession under the sun. And then there are some financial planners who are focused solely on veterinarians. There aren't a lot of us out there, but there are a few of us. And so one would be, yeah, how familiar are you with veterinarians? Because I do think that there's some value to having someone who is more familiar with veterinarians when doing financial planning, because of course we tend to have irregular incomes. We tend to have some special things to plan around. One of the most important is student loans, and so that's another question I would ask: is how familiar are you with student loans? How familiar are you with the income-driven repayment plans? Because a lot of financial advisors are not that familiar with student loans and don't know about all of the different rules and all the changes associated with income-driven repayment plans. So that's another question I would ask. You can feel free to ask about their credentials. So a couple of credentials to look for. One is the CFP, the Certified Financial Planner designation, and so that is one that you can ask, like, hey, is that one that you have? Is that one that you're working toward? And so that's a good question to ask. Also ask for on the student loan side, if it is someone who's familiar with student loans, are you a certified student loan professional? So a CSLP, that's another one to ask about when we're talking about credentials. For for a financial planner, I would also ask, how do you get paid? So there are some who get paid based on, like, their money comes from client payments, and so those are fee only financial planners. And then there are some who maybe they sell insurance and they get commissions from insurance, and that's the way that they get paid, or they get paid based on recommending certain investments, that sort of thing. So asking how they get paid, I think, is an important question as well. You could also ask if they're a fiduciary. And so fiduciary financial advisors are those who are bound to make recommendations that are in the client's best interest, versus in their own best interest. And so that would be a good question to ask as well. So.
Wow. Lots of great questions to ask. If you could not get all of that written down, um, this is recorded and we will share that recording out. So that was a lot of great information. Speaking of financial advisors, would I need a financial advisor to get up a 401k for my S Corp, or is it possible to get set up myself?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you can set it up yourself. And so, yeah, it's something where you could set it up with a major custodian like Fidelity, for example. So you could set up a solo 401k on your own. And so that would be, in that case, you would be choosing the investments yourself and managing it yourself and doing the rebalancing and things like that on your own. But yeah, absolutely. You could set it up on your own, or you could work with a financial planner and have them help you with investment management for that account. Mhm.
Perfect. And then we have another question. If I have two 401k accounts, one through their employer and one independent, can I contribute to both as long as it is under the 20k IRS limit per year?
Yeah, as long as it's under that 23,500 limit as far as like what you put into the account, then you could contribute to both. It does complicate things a little bit because then you have to keep up with it, but yeah, you could contribute to both of them. Mhm.
Perfect. And then real quick, going back to, I think this was in regards to the financial advisor, I'm assuming not all people have a certified student loan certification.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah, that's a separate certification. Mhm.
Awesome. Let's see. Okay, I just turned 65. I need to review my disability policies, but when is a normal time to drop them?
Yeah, yeah. So depending on the disability policy, so there are they typically have a certain date where when the policy ends. And so some of them end at 65, some of them end at age 67. I think there might be some that don't end until age 70. And so I would encourage you to check your specific disability policy to see, okay, when does the coverage end? And then of course at that point, like you would want to keep that policy until you got to that age, and then you could drop it at that point. Mhm.
Awesome. And then can you have both a SEP IRA and solo 401k?
So you can have both, and so I would not want you to contribute. Like if you were my financial planning client, I wouldn't want you to contribute to both of them in the same year because I think that gets too complicated. But as far as if, for example, if you have a SEP IRA and you're like, hey, in the future I want to just contribute to a solo 401k, yes, you could definitely do that.
Yeah. Okay. See. Another one from Amanda. How do we get an HSA as a relief vet?
Mhm. Yeah, so the first thing that you'll want to check on and make sure of before you think about getting an HSA is just what type of health insurance are you on? And so you'll want to make sure that you are on a high deductible health insurance plan versus just being on a regular health insurance plan. If you're on a regular health insurance plan that's not high deductible, then you're not eligible for a health savings account. There are specific parameters for health savings accounts, like for what the deductible has to be and what the maximum out of pocket contribution is. That's probably, with it being almost the end of the year, that's probably something that's about to change. So I would encourage you to look up what does the deductible need to be and what is the out of pocket maximum need to be, and then make sure that your plan actually matches that as far as being a high enough deductible, and also having an out of pocket contribution that makes it an eligible plan. And so did I answer the question? I think I left out part of that part of the answer to that question.
Did how do you get an HSA as a relief vet? So
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. The other part of that is so first you want to make sure you've got an eligible plan. And then the other part would be, okay, if let's say you do have a high deductible health insurance plan and you don't have an HSA, then you would want to look for a provider. And so there are a couple of providers that are just top of mind. There's one called Lively, where you can set up your own HSA, assuming that you've got a qualifying plan on the health insurance side. And then I believe let's see, I believe Fidelity also has one now as well. Mhm.
Great. Okay. See, lots of questions coming in, trying to filter through them. Um, all right, that one. Let's see. Can HSA money be utilized to pay insurance premiums or just bills?
Oh, just bills as far as I'm aware. Hmm.
Okay. Lots of questions about kind of setting up an LLC as a relief vet. So, don't know if you can speak to this a little bit. I know we've had a webinar in the past, kind of talking through
Hmm.
all of this, and I'm sure we will have another one next year. But for now, do you recommend starting up an LLC or corporation for taxes as a 1099 and W-2 worker?
Okay, so that's someone who's 1099 and W-2, so that's interesting. So it depends. So it's gonna be the classic financial planner answer on that. So if you're, I'll put it this way, if you're doing two relief shifts a year and that's it, then you might not need to have your own company. If you're doing lots of relief shifts, then that's when I would start to look at whether or not you would want to set up an LLC or PLLC. I say LLC or PLLC because depending on your state, you might have to set up a professional LLC. So you'll want to look up your specific state requirement because some of them will say, like Virginia is where I live, so for example, and they say, okay, a veterinarian has to set up a PLLC, not just a regular LLC. So that's something you'll want to research specifically for your state. In the state of California, they don't allow veterinarians to set up like a relief vet, for example. They would not allow you to have an LLC or a PLLC. And so most relief vets that I've worked with who are in California are sole proprietors and they don't set up their own corporation. There is something called a professional corporation that you could set up for if you are in California and you have a high income and that makes sense for you. So you can tell by what I'm saying that like depending on your state, there are different considerations. Another thing to consider. So if I just have somebody who's not in California and they could set up an LLC or PLLC, then the things that I tell my client to consider would be, okay, one, how many shifts are you doing? Is it something where it's going to be worthwhile, first of all? And then if they are doing a number of shifts, then you might look at setting up an LLC so that it's a little bit easier for you to have an employer identification number and set up business bank accounts and keep all of your finances related to your self-employment separate, which is a lot more important if you are a 1099. It's not going to be so important if you're W-2 because taxes are already being taken out and you're kind of being treated as an employee from a tax perspective if you are doing W-2 shifts. Um, so a few things to consider there. There are also some privacy considerations, and that's one of the reasons that some people will set up an LLC is that they can set it up in such a way that they don't have to put their home address out there for the public to see on their veterinary license. So that's another thing that you could consider if you have an LLC. You can hire a registered agent and use that address instead. So there's a few things to consider there.
Oh. And we do have a tax webinar. We are, I think, going to do it twice next year. So be on the lookout for some emails about that, and we can help answer any other tax questions. Um, let's see. What if I accidentally contribute more to my 401k than legally allowed? Who can catch that?
Oh, okay. So the IRS can catch it, is the short answer to that. And if you contribute too much to a 401k, or if you are in that situation where maybe you've got two employers, or you're your own employer and you have a separate employer, so over contributing is not ideal, and it's something where what you can do before you file taxes, or ideally right at the end of the year, you could actually take the extra money. It's called a removal of excess. So you can take the extra money out of that account, and that's what I would typically suggest if you have over contributed.
Okay, another one here. This one has come through quite a few times in sort of different forms. So I'm gonna try to ask the one that makes the most sense. So how do I max out the 70,000 contribution for a solo 401k as an S corp? Is it 50-50 for the employer and employee?
Oh, that's going to be a great question for a tax professional. So I'm a financial planner, but I'm not a tax professional. And so you would definitely want to ask a tax pro. And that's another tip from me is that yeah, if you're a full-time relief vet, you would definitely want to be working with a tax professional.
Great. Like I said, we do have our tax webinar coming up. So let's see. Okay. If I am an associate veterinarian but planning to leave to do full-time relief work, where do I transfer my 401k from my current employer?
Mhm. Yeah, so okay, so somebody who is like they're transitioning from their current employer to working just as an independent contractor.
Yep, yep, full-time
Okay.
relief. So, mhm.
Okay. Okay. Full-time relief. Okay. Yeah. So if you're full-time relief and you're not going to be working for that previous employer at all anymore, then you always have a few different options for what you can do with a previous employer 401k. So one option is you can keep the money where it is, and just leave it in that 401k. So that's one option. Another option is that you can open, for example, a solo 401k for yourself as a full-time relief vet, and then you can transfer the money from your previous employer retirement account. You can transfer that 401k into your new 401k, and that may be what you decide to do. And then technically another option would be that you could have that money rolled over into an IRA. So from that employer 401k into an IRA, but then that could complicate things in the future if you wanted to do a backdoor Roth IRA and keep you from being able to do it.
All right, I think we have time for one more. And hopefully you can answer this one. What kinds of questions should I ask when looking for a CPA?
Oh yeah. So that's a good one. And so one I would ask is how familiar with um how familiar with solo business owners are they? So I would start there. So do they work with a lot of solo business owners? And a lot of them will say yes to that question. I would say they don't have to necessarily be vet specific when we're thinking about a tax professional. For financial planning, I think it's more of a bonus versus a tax professional. They're generally working with more than one profession, and so I would say bonus points if they like if you ask them if they work with medical professionals who are independent contractors, especially if you're a full-time relief vet. I think that would be a bonus, if they are, because there are, for example, physicians or nurses who are locum, and it's similar considerations from a tax perspective for those professions as well as relief veterinarians, and then extra bonus points if they actually work with relief vets. So a lot of it is who they work with, and what they are most familiar with. The other thing that I would consider if you are married and you have um, if you are married and you have student loans and you are on an income driven repayment plan, then the other thing I would ask them is hey, if I need to file my taxes married filing separately to save money on my student loans, is that something you're familiar with? And for veterinarians, that's a big one, when we're thinking about a CPA. And so the average tax professional, whether they're CPA or EA, the average tax professional will look like they'll look at you like you have three heads if you say you want to file your taxes married filing separately. So if that's important to you for your student loan strategy, that's going to be a really good question to ask.
Great. And I just wanted to throw in a plug that we work with Michelle at Fit Money CPA. She does all of our tax webinars and specializes um, in helping relief vets. So I threw her website into the chat in case anyone wants to check her out. But I think we are at time. Dr. Jones, I will let you enjoy the rest of your evening. But thank you, everyone, for your great questions. If you have any other questions, her email is listed right there, so feel free to shoot her over any other lingering questions you may have. And we always appreciate you, Dr. Jones, coming on and speaking with us. Clearly, these are all popular topics that you have, and your knowledge is just incredible to help all of our vets, techs, practice managers, etc. out. So, any
Oh,
last information you want to say before we all hop off?
yeah, well, yeah, I just want to say thank you and thanks everybody for your engagement and your questions. And yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm always happy to help.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. Like I said, this is recorded and we will send out the recording to everyone who attended and RSVP'd. It will also live in our webinar library on rue.vet. So thank you for spending your Tuesday evening with us. Hope everyone has a great rest of their evening and happy Thanksgiving. All right. Bye.